Good afternoon, everyone. Naimbag amalem, maayong hapon. My name is Patrick Marquina. I'm from Willis Towers Watson, and I'll be facilitating this orientation this afternoon. For your colleagues who have yet to dial in, please check the email from WTW Marketing. You'll find the link on the WebEx for you to be able to join the session. Okay, so first of all, thanks for joining this orientation for the CPCS. I hope you and your family are all safe. I know it's been a challenging year for all of us. If there's one good news, I think for most of us, it's actually the EO 150 that was just released, no? And finally, we'll be able to start implementing the CPCS. For this afternoon, our focus is to provide you with an orientation, a background of the methodology and the rationale behind the design principles of the compensation and position classification system. Joining me today are members of the Willis Towers Watson team. You'll see them in the screen, and hopefully they'll be able to answer some of the questions in the chat box later on. Just a few reminders. The audio will stream through your computer speakers. So if you cannot hear me, please message us through the chat box. Please make sure your computer speakers are on and your console is unmuted. Use the sound button found on the lower right-hand corner of your screen to adjust your volume. All attendees are muted. So questions can be asked through the QA box. Please indicate your GOCC name and the question. And then we will allot time later on after the discussion, the presentation, for us to be able to answer some of the questions. Given the limited time, there might be questions that we'll not be able to cover. Rest assured that GCG will get back to you on those concerns. Just indicate your company name and then the questions in the chat box. Again, chat box, don't send us a private message or WTW Marketing. We will try to address them later on. The session is being recorded for internal purposes. Okay, so just a bit of a background about Willis Towers Watson for those who are not familiar with us. We're a global HR consulting firm. We started off 40 years ago with a small actuarial firm. We were called Wyatt Company. We went through several mergers and acquisitions. So back in 2016, I think our name was still Towers Watson when EO 203 was released. And then had the merger later that date, and we're now Willis Towers Watson. We work with the top private organizations in the country, but we're proud to say that for the last 17 years, we've worked with a lot of government institutions, both the GOCCs and the national government. We were the consultants for the SSL4 as well as for the SSL5. So when we started this project back in the start of third quarter 2019, it was an engagement between Willis Towers Watson, GCG, and BBM. So it also covers the SSL5. We're also the consultants who work on that. Okay, so for today, we will focus our discussion on this item. We're going to provide you a background and the development of CPCS for GOCCs, the rationale behind and the principles in terms of the design of the framework that we have proposed. We will also give you a walkthrough of the strategy, the guiding principles in designing the programs associated with the CPCS framework. We will give you an orientation of how we categorize GOCCs, what's the methodology behind, what are the measures, factors considered. a very short presentation on the position classification system. So this is the leveling or job evaluation methodology. It covers GOCC sizing, banding, as well as job grading. Then we'll move on to the compensation framework and tiering, and then we'll provide you with next steps. Okay, so just a background of the CPCS. As you may know, under GOCC Governance Act of 2011 or RA 10149, Governance Commission for Government-Owned or Controlled Corporation or GCG is mandated to classify GOCCs. So to come up with a classification system or categorization of GOCCs, for them to develop and recommend a competitive compensation and remuneration system that will allow GOCCs to be able to attract, retain, engage their talents, and for them to also be financially sound and sustainable. So in the design of the compensation, that's one major consideration. Other than being comparable with a set market that's being defined in the strategy, we also have to take into consideration the ability of the GOCCs to sustain their operation even after implementing CPCS. They're also mandated to develop a compensation and position classification which shall apply to all officers and employees of covered GOCCs. So the CPCS is applicable to all, may it be an executive or a junior level associate within all those organizations covered. Compensation, position classification for GOCCs are anchored on principles stipulated in RA 10149 as well as the Joint Resolution number 4. Here, it was stated that compensation should be standardized and rationalized across all government agencies to enable environment that will promote social justice. No? So we need to come up with a more standard way of determining compensation for all GOCCs, a just and equitable wage in accordance with the principle of equal pay for work of equal value. How do we determine equal value if we have different leveling systems? That's why to address this, we came up with a common leveling system that will be used for all GOCCs. Comparability with the private sector, doing comparable work in order to attract, retain, and motivate competent civil servants. So in the process of developing the compensation, we look at market information for private sectors, general industry, and also considered related jobs, no? Jobs that are relevant for the GOCCs that are covered in this study. Compensation rates should take into account the performance of the GOCCs. As you may know, we have asked for some financial information which will be used in the process and will be discussed in the succeeding phases. We also have to take into consideration the overall contribution, the nature of contribution of a GOCC. So they have different ways of contributing to the economy or the government as well. And we also consider purchasing power changes, no? Yung change in currency purchasing power. Also, total compensation provided to GOCC personnel shall be maintained at a reasonable level, considering fiscal realities and affordability. GOCCs have different sources of funds, no, and financial capability. And we want to make sure that when we implement the CPCS, everybody will be able to come up or make adjustments or adjust their salaries in a more sustainable way, more affordable. Last item, and I think very important, is that there should be no diminution of authorized salaries. Authorized salaries shall refer to the salary structure that has been duly authorized by the Office of the President and or by law. An approval from the governing board of the GOCC alone shall not be considered as authorized. No? Ito yung nakalagay sa Section 4, EO number 150. Okay. So the different the outputs that we have delivered for this activity, no, we have categorized and classified them into 4 major deliverables. First is the CPCS strategy. This is the guiding principles in terms of the design, the development, and the review of the system. A position classification or a job evaluation leveling system together with the index of occupational standards that you can use as reference for future hirings, a compensation framework and a pay scale, as well as a performance-based bonus. In the entire process, we went through a consultative approach where we conducted, especially during the diagnostic phase, the stakeholder interview, where we also gathered inputs from the commission, the governance commission for GOCCs, Office of the President with representatives from the Office of the Deputy Executive Secretary for General Administration, Presidential Management Staff, UP National College of Public Ad and Governance or NCPAG, Department of Finance, and Department of Budget and Management. We also conducted FGDs for representatives of the different GOCCs. We have categorized them in several sessions where we had managers and up. We also have individual contributors or rank and file and professionals. There was also a session with the union members, KAMAGFFI, KMG, LBPEA, Access sa Makaren, PAGKEA, and other representatives from other union groups. Apologies if I wasn't able to mention some of the names, but I want to recognize them, especially for those who are attending this session. Okay, let's start with the strategy. So what's a strategy? It's actually a guiding principle for us to be able to somehow set a framework or a guide, no, in terms of developing or reviewing the CPCS. So from the EO 203 in 2016, the focus is for us to revisit the strategy based on the government's trust, as well as to take into consideration the concerns that we have gathered through stakeholder interviews, as well as the focus group discussions. So to start with, to set things in context, if you look at GOCCs and all government institutions, public service is at the core of that. No? The reason why we're created, first and foremost, is actually public service. The delivery of those social services can be done through the conduct of different activities. There are those that are focused more on developmental social corporations, proprietary commercial corporations, government financial investment and trust institutions, as well as corporations with regulatory functions. The design and the intent of the CPCS strives to capture the differences in the way GOCCs would deliver their mandates, no? And it will help ensure comparability with each other and, of course, with the private sector. There are different elements when we talk about strategy, and the first is classification. It allows us to be able to determine should there be one overarching strategy across GOCCs, or do we have to determine or differentiate them according to the classification. In this CPCS, we have identified three major categories of GOCCs. I'll discuss that in detail, but just a short descriptor of those. GOCCs categorized under Category 1 are those that are dependent on national government for subsidies to fund their day-to-day operation. No? So they're not self-sustaining. It will also cover organizations, may it be a company that competes with the private sector that should have their own source of revenue, but yung average net loss sila for the last 3 years. So automatic po, that will be Category 1. Categories 2 and 3 are organizations or GOCCs that are considered as self-sustaining, meaning they have their own sources of funds to sustain or to fund their day-to-day operation. No? We're not talking about program subsidies here. No? So they have their own source of funds for their regular day-to-day. Another element of that is the determinant of job value. As mentioned a while ago, there's a need for us to be able to measure jobs, no? Yung size of a job across different GOCCs, not just within GOCCs and the different functions. So for this one, we made a refinement of the 2016 CPCS methodology, For those who were there when we had that orientation, there'll be a slight change in terms of organizational sizing for us to be able to take into consideration the defined categories in the classification. Definitions and descriptors will also have we had a little refinement to be able to capture certain levels within the different GOCCs. In terms of components of rewards that we have to focus on and mix of rewards, we covered base salary, fixed and guaranteed bonuses. So that would be your 13th month, or if there are other guaranteed payments as a multiple of salary, fixed cash allowances, as well as performance-based bonuses. Composition of comparator group. RA 10149 states that it should be comparable with the private sector. For category 1, general industry market data will be used similar to SSL. When we develop SSL, that's the same principle that we use. It should be comparable with the private sector. So for category 1, we cover jobs relevant to the national government and also capture some of the rules that are relevant for GOCCs that will be categorized under category 1. For category 2 and 3, similarly, we use private sector covering jobs relevant to GOCCs. So if you have banking-specific jobs, energy-related roles, those are covered as part of the comparator group. There are a total of 400 plus companies representing the market with varying sizes. Market reference actually refers to our pay target. No? We use the term reference because this will be our starting point. But we also have to take into consideration affordability and for us not to be far off from the national government in terms of pay. So for category 1, we're looking at yung reference natin dyan, especially for SSL din, no? Market total guaranteed. That's market pay that includes base salary in the market, their guaranteed months, as well as their fixed cash allowances. Allowances that are paid through payroll, you need not present receipts for them to be able to avail of those allowances. For category 2 and 3, we use market annual total cash. So on top of total guaranteed, we considered variable pay, incentives, performance bonuses paid in the market. And that was considered as a reference in terms of setting the pay positioning. Role of performance for category 1, performance bonus is aligned with national government. For category 2 and 3, historical financial performance of GOCCs would dictate the applicable salary structure. This is now how we link your performance with the type of rewards that you'll be getting. No? So for item 1, there'll be a defined salary structure depending on your historical financial performance. The funding of your variable pay will be based on the achievement of overall organizational performance metrics. No? So yung funding of our performance-based bonuses is dependent on or hinge on performance that's expected of a GOCC. The individual performance bonuses that will be received or the bonus scheme is standardized now across all GOCCs, similar to the national government, with varying bonus payout potential based on individual performance. If you met your target, there's a specific percentage. For those who are considered outstanding or have far exceeded their targets, they're expected to get more than the average. Okay, so that's the strategy. So in general, we're looking at 3 categories. If you look at category 1, it's similar to an SSL or an NG. For category 2 and 3, there's a bit of differentiation in terms of the way we look at pay references. Okay, but the all other components leveling will be the same. This page will give you a high-level overview of the entire CPCS, just to highlight the key points. No, but there are of course nitty-gritty details that we'll go through when we move to the next slides. First is categorization of GOCCs based on activities and sources of funds. Okay, so we categorize them based on the nature of their activity and their main source of fund to in sustaining their operation. Second, there's a component of sizing where we consider certain elements such as financials, complexity, and FTE. So organizations, after classifying them or categorizing them, we will also determine the size. That will determine and set the cap in terms of the number of levels you could have within that GOCC. No? And then the next, once we have leveled them, there'll be a salary structure appropriate depending on the category and the tier that you're classified in. For category 1, there'll be just one salary structure which is very close to the SSL rates, actually mapped to SSL rates regardless of your size. So pagdating sa category 1, yung financials natin won't have impact anymore kasi isa na lang ang kanyang kinoconsider na pay structure. But for category 2 and 3, the salary structure will further be divided into 5 tiers. Okay? Differentiated based on your historical financial performance. Obviously, the highest tier, tier 1, will get the highest pay scale. Okay? Will be able to implement the highest pay scale and then graduated. And it bridges from category 1 to the tier 1, yung top highest for the private sector. So that's just the overall view, the top level. We'll go now into the details. Okay. First is the categorization of GOCCs. So categorizing them or classifying the GOCCs would allow for a framework that will consider the varying nature of operation sector, size, and financial capability of GOCCs. We know for a fact that if we use, let's say, sector or industry, within those industries, they have different levels of financial capability. They also have different ways of funding their day-to-day operation. No? To ensure standardization, a set of criteria and parameters will be used to determine each GOCC category. This framework shall have subsequent impact on position classification as well as salary levels. Again, as mentioned a while ago, even for those parameters, factors, categorization, Willis Towers Watson came up with a recommendation based on inputs gathered from focus group discussions, analyzing the different GOCCs, and it went through that process of presentation approval with the different agencies. So this also takes into consideration inputs from DBM, DOF, and the other agencies that we have listed a while ago. Categorization is mainly dependent on two major parameters. First is financial viability, and the other one is the type of activities the GOCCs are engaged in. Okay? Activities may be classified into a broad category of commercial and non-commercial. Okay? Sino ba yung may commercial activities in nature that would compete with other players in a particular industry or sector, and those that are more focused on social services or regulatory functions. No? So we have considered that and came up with a approach to segment them into three categories, the GOCCs. So again, category 1 first. As mentioned a while ago, these are GOCCs that rely on national government subsidies to fund their day-to-day operations. Okay? They have an average net loss for the last 3 years, regardless of whether they receive operational subsidies or not. Okay? So it's not only GOCCs with operational subsidies. So if you are competing with in a particular sector, but your average financials for the last 3 years is negative, automatic you'll be placed under category 1. Again, sustainability, financial capability is taken into consideration. Category 2 now are GOCCs that are self-sustaining, where sources of funds are generated from mainly, okay, I would use the term mainly non-commercial activities. such as mandatory contributions, regulatory fees, license fees, admin fees, operational fees, investment, concession fees, or through investment of assets or indirect income. For organizations where there are contributions or a captured market, most of the time they'll be categorized under this group. No? Category 3 are self-sustaining. So pareho rin siya ng category 2. But if you look at the sources of funds, mainly they're generated from commercial activities. There's actual product development, they market, they sell, they compete directly with the private sector. In most cases, they don't have a captured market or a captive market for them to get their clients, no? And their products and services, as mentioned, directly compete with private sector. So GOCCs are organized in different for different reasons. Some have were initially incorporated or created for a social service mandate at nag-develop siya, no? Eventually nagkaroon ng opportunity to invest contributions. That's why there's indirect income, okay? And those are also considered in the classification. Okay? Again, category 1, dependent on subsidies, no commercial activity. Category 2, they have their own sources of funds, but main source of fund is from non-commercial activities. For category 3, non-captive market, focus on commercial activities that directly compete with the private sector. So this will be the categorization of GOCCs. Categories will be communicated to you by GCG. It's not part of the presentation today. You'll get those advice and authorization letter from GCG. Okay, so to further define what we mean by non-commercial GOCCs, no, or entities, these are organizations or GOCCs that are considered as non-government business enterprises, non-GBEs, no, determined by the Commission on Audit, government instrumentalities vested with corporate powers. Those GOCCs organized for cultural, educational, civic, scientific, or charitable purposes, social protection. So there might be GOCCs that you might think, yes, indirectly we compete with the private sector, but you were created mainly to somehow provide a channel for a certain segment within a particular industry, no? Para meron silang ibang option other than, let's say, a market rate or a very high interest rate in the market. Privatized operations and primarily generates revenue through collection of concession fees are also considered non-commercial. Business income derived from activities undertaken for development purposes. So interest on investments, lease or sale of properties, conduct for conduits for sector development, marketing arms of national government or those GOCCs that were created or attached agencies to support programs of a national government agency. Okay, GOCCs that generates revenue through fees born out of their regulatory powers. Okay, so merong fix or meron tayong regulatory fees na pumapasok. Registered as non-stock, non-profit corporations, including those that are considered as foundations, similar to a foundation. Now, when we talk about commercial GOCCs are those that undertake operations or provide services that directly compete with the private sector. There are product services that they have to come up with to be able to compete within that segment. They design and conceptualize their own. They manufacture and produce those products and services. They have selling. There's a sales team. Logistics involved in delivering the products to and services to the end customer. May customer service. So pag tinignan nyo, most of the time, full value chain yan, no? From product development up to customer service. Property development and management are considered commercial activities. Banking operations, no? So for those that are for banks, automatic, no? We're looking at those considered as commercial activity. Extractive industries such as oil and gas. No? So why are we focusing a lot of time in the categorization? This will have a significant impact in terms of what type of financial measure will be used in sizing the organization. It also gives you, it will also determine what will be the applicable pay scale that for that specific GOCC, no? What can be adopted as a pay scale. Categorize based on nature of activities as well as sources of funds. That is the main principle for the classification or categorization. Again, if you have questions, please use the chat box. Indicate the GOCC name because we anticipate given the time we might not be able to answer all your questions, but definitely GCG will get back to you on all those concerns. For this session, we'll focus on items on the framework. All policy-related concerns, please include it there and rest assured that GCG will get back to you. Okay, so now we go to the leveling. We've already categorized them. Next is the leveling methodology. Leveling, position classification, or more commonly termed or more commonly known in the market in the HR space as job evaluation, is a systematic process of determining as objectively as possible level and nature of contribution of a role in a particular organization. So this is more internal looking on how organizations are organized, reporting lines, what are the required knowledge for those roles, how they impact the business, what's the extent of that impact, people-related skills, analytical skills, and varying levels of leadership requirement. Again, the leveling system takes into consideration not just the number of years required or qualification standards. That is important, but we make sure that we capture the overall requirement of a job. What is that minimum requirement for them to deliver on a particular task within a GOCC? Its establishment, no, it will allow us to define jobs and create a job hierarchy. It will provide a foundation for all other HR systems other than those that are covered by CPCS, such as base pay, incentives, career management, workforce planning, leadership, and learning development are normally hinged or anchored on the levels or the grades. It's at the core of all our people programs, determining the relative values of jobs internally against jobs within the organization and allows us to benchmark and compares jobs across different GOCCs as well as the market. Again, we cannot expect that an accountant, an entry-level accountant in one GOCC will have the same level as the most junior job in another GOCC. Qualifications required are different. Definitions of the rules, level of contribution may be different. So we've created hierarchies as well to cover for that. And this leveling will allow us to measure value of jobs and have one yardstick across different GOCCs. So the CPCS methodology, it's a three-step process. This is where sizing will play an important role. The first step is organization measurement or sizing, where we set the cap in terms of the number of levels a GOCC could have. No? Again, sabi natin, GOCCs have different sizes, so yung levels din nila would be different. The CEO of one GOCC, even if let's say they're in the same industry as another GOCC, may be graded at a different level depending on the complexity of the business. And complexity in the methodology is anchored on financials as well as FTE and the nature of the operation. Once we have determined the size, Then we can move to the job-specific definitions, which is banding and grading. We'll go through that step later on, no? But I'll focus more on the sizing. The job evaluation methodology, yung kanyang sizing mechanism, as mentioned a while ago, is called, we'll consider three dimensions. Financials, the financials related to the category where you are classified, no? So that's the importance of categorization. The financials that will be considered will be dependent on the category. Complexity of the organization, is it purely social services? Is it considered as uh, um, social services plus they're self-sustaining with non-commercial activities, and those that are engaged in complex commercial activities, no? Full-time equivalent headcount, FTE, for purposes of sizing, will be based on your latest approved organizational structure, no? Merong qualifier doon, I'll define later. Ano ba yung kino-consider natin na organizational structure? This measures a GOCC's magnitude and complexity to determine number of levels within that organization. For a very small organization, you cannot expect, no? Parang it's not necessary to have several layers of executives. Doesn't make sense. And for a higher organization, when needed for signing authority or let's say approval process, the hierarchy follows, no? We have more levels, we have a wider range of executive grades for bigger organizations. Again, the weight associated with it, financials will be 60%, complexity is 30%, FTE is 10%. Now, why FTE is just 10%? No? After careful review, what we notice, of course, for some organizations, especially if you don't have any, I would say, technology intervention or enablement in place, the tendency is we have more people, no? And in terms of measuring the size and complexity of businesses, especially for the private sector, most of the time ang tinitignan dyan are financials and the nature of the business that they are engaged in. Okay, so let's go to dimension 1. The financial measure, again, in consultation with DOF and DPM, will be dependent on the category that you are classified in. For category 1, those that are subsidized by the government, generating revenue from activities unrelated to their core mandate, or negative financials average for the last 3 years. The financials that we will be using will be the COA-DBM or board-approved operating expense, no? Including maintenance and operating expense, MOOE, personnel services with operation subsidies from the government. That is category 1. For category 2, source of funds, they generate revenue from captive fees, regulatory fees, license fees, concession, operational fees, no? Ang gagamitin natin still COA-DBM, board-approved operating expense, including MOOE, PS, plus investment income. So for some GOCCs where they get either funds or contributions, investments for those funds are also considered in the financials for category 2 organizations. Okay? OP includes sales commissions, advertising expense, MOOE, expenditures to support the operations of the government agencies. I'm sure you're very familiar with those terminologies. I won't go through it one by one, but just in case we have the definition, we can share the definition to you later on. Category 3, these are organizations where their main source of fund is from activities of marketing, selling products and services that directly competes with private sector. For this organization, the financials that we will consider in terms of sizing will be the annual gross revenue less captive statutory contributions, okay, if any. No? So kung automatic yung contribution, you don't market for it, it's from a captive market, that's taken out of the sizing financials. For banks, there's a specific financial measure. It's called total operating income, which is defined doon, no? Yung net earnings, interest expense, total operating income, revenue less operational direct and indirect costs from sales and revenue. Yan yung kino-consider for banking institutions. Okay? So again, revenue for category 3, total operating income for banks. Those financials, if you remember, during the course of the review of the CPCS, we have requested GOCCs to submit their 3-year financial data. We also requested for FTE information and some other information related to profile of the organizations. Okay. So for dimension 1, for us to determine the grades, there are 25 grades in the methodology, no? But later on, I'll discuss, nag-set tayo ng cap in terms of the maximum grade. But the highest, as the smallest organization in the methodology is a grade 16, okay? But there are organizations where financials as well as other measures could be much bigger, and they could range from grade 17 up to the highest level it could get, no, depending on the financials. So all you have to do when we look at dimension 1, look at your financials, average 3 years, and look at which category you would fall in. If your revenue is between 3.975 billion to 7.95 billion pesos, average 3 years, your global grade or the grade assigned to your financial dimension is grade 17. For those that are earning more than 5.3 trillion, the grade for the dimension ng financials, it's grade 25. Again, there are 3, no? Nasa financials pa lang tayo. So, assign a grade depending on your financials. That will be the financial dimension. Times 0.6 because that's 60% of the total weight. Next is complexity. Okay? Sorry, no? Pagdating do sa financials, you might be wondering saan ang galing tong financial ranges na to. It's the same methodology we use globally for our clients. It considers different sizes of organization within a sector, both revenue generating as well as non-commercial entities. So this will somehow give us an indication of the relative or the applicable values, no, per size of an organization. Dimension 2 is complexity. Tatlo lang yan. Either your category 1, if you're category 1, yung dimension mo for complexity, your grade 16, or category 2, which is an 18, or a category 3, which is 20. Again, categories 1, 2, and 3, we have defined that in the previous pages. No? That's the importance of the classification as mentioned a while ago. Okay, so meron na tayong dimension ng financials. Now we're into complexity. The last item is the FTE. No? Plantilla, what's the approved FTE? This will be 10% of the total weight for the sizing methodology. The range of FTE is presented there. If your head count is between 240 to 620, then you'll be assigned a grade 18 numerical grade for head count. For those that are organizations with more than 10,000, you're grade 22 in terms of head count. For those organizations where your head count will fall in between yung 2 adjacent grades, no? Nasa breakpoint siya. For example, 240. 240 could be the start for an 18 or the end of a 17. For the methodology, yung calculation, we will use the lower grade. Kung nasa breakpoint kayo, no? Again, FTE will be based on the latest approved plantilla, no? Only a small portion, yan po, lumalabas. So, positions that are filled with regular, contractual, or casual employees will be measured, no? The basis shall be organization structure and staffing pattern, or OSSP, with approval signature from GCG chairman or DBM secretary to 2012, or if GOCC is non-chartered, then approval of the board is required. So yun yung gagamitin natin. If you remember in EO 203, there were prerequisites for implementation. And the current commission tried to rationalize and simplify implementation instead of you going through the process of a reorg again, leveling and something, we'll be using whatever is the approved OSSP. Okay, so in terms of sizing, that is the number that we will use. Now, in cases where a GOCC have already restructured but have yet to get approval from a headcount of 300, now you're using a 500 headcount. For purposes of sizing, we will be using the 300 because that is the approved OSSP. Okay? So again, for sizing, there are three dimensions. Financials, which is based on 3-year average that you have provided. Complexity, which is based on the categorization. FTE, which is also based on the latest approved OSSP or board approved for non-chartered. So how it will look like? If we have all those grades already, all you have to do is assign the weight and get the total of that. So if an organization or GOCC would have a financial grade of 21, complexity of 18, and FTE headcount of 22, then the resulting grade will be 20. Okay? If you look at the dimensions for financials and FTE, it will range from 16 to 25 because that is the range that we have, no, for the methodology that we use for the private sector. For CPCS purposes, we will set a cap, or we have determined the cap. The grade, the highest grade that any GOCC could get will be a grade 20. So even if, let's say, upon calculation, lumabas 21 or 22, nakaset siya sa grade 20. Mainly because yung ating kinokomperahan din sa NG, when we did the SSL5, yung President of the Philippines, bine-benchmark lang din namin yan, grade 20 in the private sector. And we don't want to exceed that in terms of size or level. Okay? So if your result in terms of calculation ends at 21, then automatic you're a grade 20 organization. Ano ba po ang ibig sabihin ng grade 20? That means the organization could have 20 grades internally. The highest job within that GOCC, may it be the president, CEO, or what you call them, no, yung organic job that heads that entity, that is the highest grade. That is grade 20. Everybody else, direct reports, executives, will be graded lower than the set cap. Okay? Now, if I'm a grade 16 organization, that means my CEO is grade 16. It's the same size as an executive for a grade 20 organization. If you look at it, it would make sense, no? Kasi yung size ng operation of a very small organization could be similar to a business unit or a functional head in a very large entity. Okay? Yung sizes ninyo, yung size ng organization will be communicated with you, to you by GCG, no? Meron kayong marireceive na authorization where the organizational size will be determined there. When we did the review, we used the last 3-year average. Let me just remind the group that there's a GOCC notice that was issued, I guess, if not today, yesterday, that will require organizations to submit 2020 financials. No? If there are audited financials, much better. This will allow them to validate the figures that were used during the review for sizing. We know that there was a pandemic, 2020 figures may be much different from what you used to have 2019, 18, and 17. Okay, so again, first step pa lang tayo sa leveling, that's sizing. That's how you determine the size, no? Financials is based on the category. Complexity is also anchored on category. FTE is your latest approved OSSP or board approved for non-chartered GOCCs. Once we have sized the organization, and you normally do it once, and probably you will review it every 3 years, or when GCG would require you to submit another round of review. Yung next step is more job focus. Pagka sinawag na job focus, these are for roles under a CEO role. No? Kasi sa CEO, automatic, the size of the organization, that is the grade of the highest job within that entity. No? In the plantilla, not the incumbent, kasi baka wala kayong actual CEO o president now, no? Meron nagko-concurrent role. That's reserved for the topmost job within the organization. Yung next step is for us to band jobs. No? Yung banding, yung kaninang pinakita natin na 3 steps, no? Banding allows us to categorize jobs based on their nature and level of contribution. Jobs will have different nature of contribution. Within that contribution or type of contribution, may different levels. We recognize that. The methodology also recognizes that there's an individual career path. No? In the past, or probably 15, 20 years ago, the notion is that for somebody to be at a managerial level, you have to manage a team. Okay? Now, a lot of organizations would tend or associate value to a particular job, even for individual contributors. They could have a level similar to a manager if the subject matter expertise required of a role will merit, no, or is a strong, kumbaga, it would support, no, that definition of a job. So yung bands allows us to categorize the jobs, kung management ba yan, individual contributor. Within individual contributor, there are subcategories, and then the next step is leveling and grading. Okay, I'll walk you through the banding now. No? So na-size na natin. Titingnan natin ngayon, are jobs considered executives and below? Okay. When you see the terminologies here, such as executive career band, management career band, professional general staff, those are what we consider as bands in the methodology. No? Internally, you might call an AVP an executive. AVP, VP, SVP, EVP, all the VP titles are considered executives. In the methodology, there's a different definition of that. Okay? So every time we look for a job or we try to evaluate the job, the first question is that job focused on managing people? They have a team under them. They're measured based on the results of a team. Okay? They have direct line subordinates, no? Direct line. Pag nakita niyo yung structure, merong direction line reporting to that box. No? That is considered under a management career band. Okay? So, careful lang po because in some structures that we saw, meron siyang line, no? From junior to specialist to senior professional up to executives, lahat yun direction line. May meaning po yung line na yun, no? So, we have to evaluate and further analyze. Meron ba talagang people management responsibility required? Meaning that role is measured on their people management role and they have measurements based on results of the team. Automatic po, management band yan. Roles that would achieve through their own work or with specific functional expertise, They can provide technical guidance to more junior staff, or in some cases, they are expected to train, mentor junior team members, but have no direct reports, no organic team under them. They may lead activities, but they really don't have supervisory or management responsibility, no? Firing, hiring, pay decisions, those are considered as individual contributors. Okay? And we have reserved 3 bands for those roles. Let's now go to the definition. So yun yung nature, yun yung tinatawag nating nature of contribution. Are you contributing as an individual contributor or a management band? That's the first question. Next question is level of contribution. This will now determine whether you are an executive or a management supervisory band. Within those bands, there are levels. Okay, so ito pa lang yung broad categorization within a management band. In the methodology, executives are typically the most senior level in a function or a job family. Typically, direct reports of CEOs or president or GM, but not all direct reports are automatic. No? Sabi ko lang, typically, no? They need to have other responsibilities such as setting strategy, either for that vertical or they influence strategy for the entire GOCC. No? They help steer the direction of an organization. Again, typically one downs of your CEO president, they impact the broader organization performance directly, and in some cases for enabling functions indirectly. We've seen GOCCs where they have a CEO. The next level job is not titled as a VP or SVP, pero meron siyang strategy setting. Part siya ng executive team that strategizes for the organization. Then that could be an executive. In some cases, you could have a title of a VP, but the focus is more on operational day-to-day implementation of strategy directed or set by the CEO or president. That will fall under the next category, which we call supervisory or management band. It's a wide range. No? Those leadership roles, no, that may be direct reports of your executives or direct report of a CEO president, but focus more on operational day-to-day strategy, no, strategizing for the operation or policy development or policy approval, or let's say at highest inputs to strategy because they handle sales for a particular product, but there's a head on top who decides on the strategy. That could fall under supervisory management. The most junior level under that band are what we consider in GOCCs na supervisors or junior managers, where they have organic teams under them. It doesn't matter kung ang team lang niya team of 2 or team of 200, as long as there's people management responsibility. Normally, at a junior level, they're focused on operational day-to-day activity, monitoring, reviewing, checking. They have inputs to performance. They communicate performance targets. Those are what we consider a supervisory management band. Again, for organizations, GOCCs that are very hierarchical, you have lots of titles at the top. Executives are reserved for these roles defined here. So I may have a title of a P, VP, SVP, EVP, AVP. Please analyze whether that is a job that would have direct contribution in terms of strategy. Don't focus on the title. I could have a title of an operations head. Walang VP title or probably senior manager ang rank. But look at the role. It could be an executive or it could be a management band. So if you look at it, yung executives may 16 to 20. For a grade 16 organization, ang executive na considered lang doon is the president. For a grade 20, you could have 16, 17, 18, 19, depending on the jobs you have presented during the review, no? So yung basis namin in leveling jobs are the job descriptions, organizational charts, and the discussions we had, no, during the previous sessions, the review, no? Now, to answer questions related to GOCCs who were unable to comply with the submission, I think there'll still be time for you to be able to submit. There's a timeline that will be provided to you for you to comply so that you can implement the CPCS. Yung leveling phase, okay, if you look at EO203 before, you're required to submit your leveling. This time around, we did the leveling. GCG is already reviewing it. We did the leveling for you. We gathered inputs from your representatives, job descriptions, and organizational structures. Those will be the basis for the levels. Next. Okay, professional band. Okay. In the methodology, we have our own definition of professionals. No? It doesn't necessarily mean that your employees, your junior associates, or your current processors, customer service are not professionals. You can still call them professionals internally. But in the methodology, we have our own definition of what we consider as professional jobs and jobs that will be categorized under this band. At a minimum, this role will require a specific college degree who's expected to apply that science in the performance of a role. Because it's judgment-based, it will require them to apply concepts related to that formal education, whether that's accountancy, engineering, IT, or legal, or marketing, no? That is required of the role. There are other functions within the organization that wala pang degree na specific out there, no? Even HR is I think a few schools are offering an HR course. Yung next item there is, kung hindi nyo ma-qualify using that definition, the job should have knowledge or exposure to fundamental theories, principles, practices required in performing a particular role. The role is not day-to-day rule-based type of work. They either conceptualize, no, recommend, makes analysis based on information either provided or they research to come up with solutions, decisions. These are not rule-based work. Works independently with clear framework of accountability, is bound by it's not bound by step-by-step procedures. I know for a fact that even in finance there are accounting standards, but the accountants have that science or knowledge of accounting principles that they can apply into the day-to-day operation. That is considered as professionals. Now, if you look at the grade, the grade ranges from an 8 to a grade 15. That means a professional in the new methodology could have the same grade as a manager. But typically, those roles are what we consider as subject matter experts. No? If you have an individual contributor that can decide on a particular discipline within an organization, or they provide advice to a MANCOM, or they provide advice to your execom because of that deep technical expertise required of a role, even if they don't manage a team, that can be considered as a subject matter expert or a higher level professional. Okay? So, pag tinignan natin, sample ko lagi finance kasi yun yung pinakamadali, although hindi finance sa background ko. In accounting, those that are preparing income statements, yung nagbabalanse, nag-a-analyze, no, ng books, most likely yung may signing authority, those are considered professionals. If you move to the next band, also individual contributor, what we consider as general staff, it will range from grades 4 to 9. Roles that perform clerical, admin, specialized support, technical tasks are considered general staff. Also, those roles that are filled by any college graduate where knowledge of a particular process is a greater weight in the performance of a role. So probably you have a preference for an accounting grad, pero ang gagawin niya mag-process ng payables or mag-process ng check preparation. That will fall under a general staff role. No? So your preference for qualification, you have to revalidate that. Is that the requirement of a role? The methodology will still allow you to hire an accountant to perform non-professional accounting role for progression purposes. But for purposes of valuing that job, that is a general staff role. For more specialized fields where vocational training or certification courses may be required, for example, technician roles, no? Those that would support your engineering jobs, those are considered technicians or technical support. We consider them as general staff. Job holders have limited authority to apply independent judgment. In most cases, if they are allowed to, it's because of their experience, no? Based on practice and precedence. So because they've been with the role for so many years, they're allowed to make decisions. But the job is not designed as such. Okay, it just so happened we have incumbents that are capable of doing that. So general staff, processors, uh, uh, those that provide support to our professionals who make decisions, no? Normally that are considered general staff. Rule-based type of work, okay? Sabihin na natin, they can make decision, they can approve a loan or a credit, but it's based on certain rules, guidelines. There are limits in terms of approval process. Hindi mo kailangan maging accountant to do that or engineering graduate to do that. That is considered as a general staff. Okay? Now, if you look at NG, yung iOS ni NG, yung kino-consider doon na sub-pro pro, hindi po siya automatic na pag sub-pro general staff, pag pro doon ka na sa taas, no? Kasi it straddles between professional band in the methodology and general staff, no? But when we did SSL, just for the information of the team, we also mapped the same grades, no? To SSL to come up with the rates. So pag sinabi natin, for example, SG11, we know that's close to a professional in this methodology. And in SG11 in NG, the rates for the grade 11 there are somewhat similar to what we're proposing for category 1 grade 8, and that's based on a professional salary in the market based on our definition. Manual work, manual labor will perform operational craft, manual task where certification is not required. Okay, I know there are training certificates, but here we're looking at specialization or technical certification. Pagka hindi kailangan yon, most likely manual work. They perform manual, repetitive tasks according to established procedures with very limited opportunity or independence for decision making. Work involves purely physical effort, no, manual physical work, and they typically use materials, no, machineries, tools, or they operate something. Yun yung typically kino-consider nating manual work. So again, those are the levels of contributions. There are grades attached for each category. So in a general staff, meron tayong 4 to 9. 4 will represent an entry, 9 could be a lead, no? The definitions and descriptors of those will not be discussed today, but will be part of the documents that will be shared with you in terms of implementation, no? It will take a longer time for us to go through all those definitions. You'll have an opportunity to look at that once those implementation guidelines are released. Okay. So, nag-categorize na tayo. Again, importance nun in terms of sizing and salary structure. Okay. Then we went through the leveling phase. There are 3 steps: sizing, leveling, grading. We discussed until banding, no? Yun lang ang diniscuss natin for today. But as mentioned, we use dimensions such as financials, FTE for sizing, that will determine the grades of the jobs in the GOCCs. GCG will issue the levels for the different organizations. That's why it was very important for you to comply. Kaya, if you notice, we follow up in terms of the submission during the review phase because that will be the basis of the levels of the jobs for you to be able to implement right away. Now we move to compensation framework and tiering. So how do we pay them now that we have established and determined what is the value of those jobs in the different GOCCs? Okay. The total compensation for GOCCs, officers, employees will include basic salaries, guaranteed months, no? Allowances, benefits, incentives, and a variable pay. We will not cover indirect compensation such as life retirement insurance benefits, ECC health insurance pag-ibig fund benefits, no? Because those are standards that may mandates yan, no? May kanyang statutory contribution and statutory benefits. That is not covered in the CPCS. Okay. So in terms of designing the salary structure or what we consider as pay scale, for category 1, we are adopting a salary structure that is aligned with SSL. Kung ano yung nakukuha ng NG, salary rates or SSL 5 tranche 4, I believe, no? Hanggang tranche 4 yun, no? Regardless of organization size, that is what the maximum rate you can implement for that GOCC. Again, those are organizations operating similar to a national government agency, organizations that are at a net loss. They receive operating subsidies from the national government, no? Hindi self-sustaining. You can implement rates similar to a Category 1 or SSL. We map that, no? Again, we're also the ones who did SSL 5, and with the help of DBM, we were able to map the grades between the CPCS and SSL, and we were able to come up with those ranges. For categories 2 and 3, the structure that was developed are closer to market rates, no? Structures are further categorized into 5 tiers to allow differentiation based on GOCC financial performance. We remember during focus group discussions, no, a lot of questions whether standardize na lang lahat, sabi ng mga employees, or differentiate because we have different size. So the categorization allows us to differentiate based on capability, categorize them based on similar nature of activity. Similarly, for the structure, those of the same size organization can adopt a similar tier or category. So for 2 and 3, again, meron tayong 5 pay scales. Those are the tiers. So tiered yung structure natin. But for GOCCs na category 2 and 3, even if let's say you're self-sustaining, but your financial performance is less than 1.98 billion pesos, you will have to adopt category 1. Okay? This is for sustainability purposes, no? The cost associated with the implementation may be too huge for an organization that's lower than 2 billion in revenue to be able to accommodate that. Okay? Recommended rates are the maximum figures that you can adopt. As mentioned in the EO, if financial performance or capability won't allow you to implement the prescribed or the reference or the recommended tier, you can recommend a lower tier or a lower percentage of the category 1 depending on financial capabilities. No? The impact on PS and sustainability will have to be evaluated. Okay? So design is more aligned in national government, where you will see step increments now. Meron ng step 1 to 8, similar to an NG. You can use similar administration, incorporating pay for performance. But the details of such in terms of administration will be part of an IRR that GCG will be issuing. So in terms of tiering, if you were categorized under 2 and 3, this will show you the applicable tier for your applicable specific GOCC. So if I'm at tier 3, if I'm in category 2, sorry, and my financials is less than 20.3 billion, ang gagamitin kong salary structure is the one meant for tier 3. Okay? If my financials is more than 53B, I'm in category 2 or 3, regardless of meron specific financials doon, ano? I can implement tier 1. In the event that your financials is beyond 53B, but cost-wise and sustainability, you cannot afford to use tier 1, you can adopt a lower tier structure. That is, I guess it was communicated as part of the EO. The details of that will be part of the IRR. Again, category 2 and 3 organizations with less than 1.98 billion in financials will automatically be adopting category 1 structure, which is SSL. I'll speed up a bit. It's 3:24, so we can answer some of the questions. So how it looks like, ganito siya, no? Pareho siya ng SSL. You have the grades, 20 grades at max. Of course, if you're a grade 16, even if you're category 2 and tier 1, you cannot apply the salary of a grade 17. Hanggang 16 lang ang salary, no? The monthly basic salaries provided is the maximum amount a GOCC can grant to its officers and employees. You can apply a lower percentage based on the prescribed rates, depending on parameters that will be set, no, by the GCG. So ito lang yung sample. Pinakikita natin tier 1. If you're a tier 1 organization, grade 20 organization, size 20, the CEO president's salary would range from 588 to 735. That is even higher than the president of the Philippines salary. Okay? That is for category 2 and 3. Of course, if you move to category 1, the grade 20 job is closer to that of a president of the Philippines. Okay? So those are the ranges. In the EO, it says salaries of employees should be adjusted to the minimum or step 1 of the structure. No? Yung implementation in terms of employees paid within the range or paid outside step 8 will be part of the IRR that will be issued by GCG. So we don't have yet yung policy related to that. It will to follow siya, no? But automatic yun yung tinitignan. If you're below step 1, then the direction is to adjust to step 1. Now, if your salaries are beyond the range, again, no diminution on authorized salaries. If you're receiving that already, nothing will be taken out, no, or will be walang drawback. It will be still be your salary. Ang question na lang is what would be the subsequent increases. That will be part of an IRR. Now, allowances will be standardized. There'll be just 13 months guaranteed. There'll be a cash gift of 5,000. Rata, transportation allowance representation will be provided to managers 11 and up. Ranges from 120 to 264 depending on the level, similar to what you have in SSL. There will be a pera worth 24,000, a uniform allowance, performance incentive worth 5,000, a mid-year bonus of 1 month. No? Sineparate namin yung mid-year bonus doon, 1 month. So in effect, kung makukuha natin yung mid-year bonus, para tayo may 14 months per year. Performance bonus, yung average nung breakdown nung lowest performance level up to the highest performance level, in effect, is average of 0.53. No? All items paid beyond what you have right now, unless they're authorized salaries, no? So halimbawa may authorized 14 months kayo, na-move natin yan, na-consider natin yan in the adjustment. But all items beyond this, I believe there's a clause in the EO that would address items you used to receive that are not part of the standard items anymore. Okay? Benefits, healthcare, leaves, provident funds. I won't discuss in detail. There are provisions in the EO, executive order. The details, the nitty-gritty details in terms of transitioning to that and the implementation guidelines will also be part of an IRR. Last item. So we have 2 minutes before Q&A. PBB. So in terms of eligibility requirements, only GOCCs that have met the threshold, weighted average of at least 90% in their performance scorecard will be able to uh, give out PBB. It shall apply, it should be able to satisfy all other conditions set by GCG for the grant of a PBB. For an individual, you must at least have 9 months of continuous service with the government to be eligible for a grant of a PBB if your performance would merit. No? The breakdown, yung performance distribution, the top players or top performers can get 65% of their MBS, 57.5 approximately for the next 25. The rest, if you're performing, as long as hindi kayo baksak, you get 50% MBS or monthly basic salary for PBB. Companies, GOCCs categorized under 2 and 3 under CPCS, you have the option, no? You'll be given an option to provide a higher PBB rate for certain critical incumbents or probably high-performing incumbents depending on the qualifiers that will be set, subject to the approval of GOCC Governing Board, endorsement of the supervising agency, and final approval of the GCG. No? Yan yung ating, nakalagay po yan dun sa ating executive order as well. No? Salaries will be based on December 31 salary of the performance year that where PBB would apply. Okay, that's my last slide. No? So we'll try to answer questions in the chat box. We have 30 minutes to cover questions. Unfortunately, due to limited time, I know there are a lot of questions. If and when we don't get to answer those, rest assured we will compile them. Policy-related questions will be forwarded to GCG. You will hear from them, okay? And then they'll email you, no, yung concerns related to the methodology or you have specific concerns. There'll also be an FAQ that will be released later on for some of the questions. So I'll ask my colleague Chantal to, you've summarized the questions, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions that we have received as mentioned by Patrick, and we tried to actually collect them together and identify some themes. So maybe I can start na Pat with some of the few questions that we have. Yeah,
Okay.
so the first question
Yeah.
would be, all right, maraming nagtanong nito. No? So when is the effectivity date of the CPCS?
Okay. So effectivity date of the CPCS. So if I remember right, under Section 3 of the Executive Order, the salary structure for GOCCs, the allowances, benefits stated there, shall be effective upon issuance of the corresponding authorization of GCG. So I guess you will receive an authorization of the GCG, which will probably include the categorization, the levels, as well as the applicable tier. No? And the same section authorizes the GCG, no? Also, and the NBank to set a uniform date across GOCCs. So that could be a possibility also, which shall in no case be earlier than the date of effectivity of EO number 150. Okay, so yung GCG in NBank is already discussing about this authority granted to them by the executive order, and whatever they will decide on this matter will be included in the implementing guidelines. That's what was communicated to us during our last meeting with them.
All right. Yep. And the second question would be, when can they expect the IRR or implementing guidelines to be given out? And is there a timeline for GCG to fully implement the CPCS?
Okay. Right now, I believe GCG is currently drafting the implementing guidelines for EO 150. No? The implementing guidelines will be finalized with the assistance of the Department of Budget and Management in accordance with the executive order and the interagency CPCS TWG composed of DBM, DOF, and the Office of the President. Once finalized, said implementing guidelines will be approved by the GCG and bank. So that's the process that they will have to go through. Uh, Although EO 150 did not give GCG a specific timeline for the issuance of the implementing guidelines, similar to other laws that were released in the past, no. I believe they are directed, GCG is directed to submit to the Office of the President within 90 days from its effectivity a consolidated CPCS report with the status of implementation of those CPCS, no, for all covered GOCCs. Again, I think there are certain requirements. There's a GCG issue once yesterday, as mentioned a while ago, either yesterday or this morning, that will require you to submit 2020 financials for them to validate. Um, Rest assured, within 90 days, we'll hear from the GCG. Yun yung aming understanding of the EO. Next
Okay.
question,
Yep.
Chantal.
I guess apart from the 2020 financials that was requested yesterday, are there any other submissions required from GOCCs or are they just waiting for GCG to give them the authorization of this?
Okay. For EO 150, as mentioned a while ago, GCG tried to simplify the implementation for GOCCs to be able to already implement. No? So wala na yung requirement for org review in the past, leveling, no? Wala na kasi ginawa na rin yung leveling. Actually, they're reviewing it already. No? So other than that, the submission na ni-require of you during the review, I believe wala na other than the 2020 financial. In case there is, GCG will issue notice to GOCCs requiring them to submit other information. But I believe it's just the 2020 financial. Okay? For job evaluation, again, you were required to submit information and we requested for your participation. So that will already be the basis for the leveling. No? For those with incomplete requirements or who weren't able to comply with the submission, you'll hear from GCG on what other information or data will be required so that you'll be able to implement the CPCS.
Okay. Thanks, Pat. I think you answered this, no? Will there be a reorganization prior to the implementation of the CPCS? But I think another related question would be, what will happen if they are still undergoing a reorganization at this point?
Okay. Okay. The answer to the first question on organization, no, you're not required to do a reorg. Again, your latest approved OSSP and board approved can be used, no, as a basis. And then yung question mo, sorry, second question, Chantal, sorry.
What will happen for those naman currently undergoing reorganization? How will the
Okay,
CPCS?
okay. Uh you'll be able to implement, but in terms of categorization and sizing, yung basis will be the latest approved, no? If you want to implement the new one, then you'll have to go through the process of having that org structure approved, the levels, I think, approved by GCG as well, no? My personal thoughts, if you can implement using the current, rather than wait for that new structure, better do that siguro. But if you think there's savings coming from that structure, mas magiging efficient, we can have kumbaga it's a more appropriate organization, then it's an option, no? You can wait for the implementation, have your organization structure approved. May questions pa, Chantal?
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Dami-dami pa, wait lang. If a GOCC is fully compliant already, what can they expect from GCG if they submitted
Okay.
all the requirements?
Okay, based on what was communicated to us, no, when we had a meeting with them, once the implementing guidelines have been issued by GCG, and after they're currently reviewing the evaluation of GOCC's organization, no. Once that's finalized and the implementing guidelines have been issued already, the GOCC will receive an authorization, no. That's the term they use to implement CPCS. The said authorization will include your category, your evaluation results, so I suppose the jobs and the grades, and your tiering. So that will be the things you will get from GCG.
All right. There are a few questions on financials, Pat. So, for example, for financials, what years were considered for the study? What 3 years were considered regard with the for the study? And then there were also a lot of questions lang on whether it's net revenue, gross revenue. So, do you wanna maybe just show the slide on go back
Okay.
to that? Yeah.
Let me go back to that slide. In terms of the number of years, if you remember when we asked the information, yung initial na hiningi namin was 2017, 18, 19. But we also tried to secure 2020 information during the validation phase. We so for reference in terms of years, that's 2020, 2019, and 2018. But for 2020, since majority of the organizations during that time hindi pa audited yung financials nila or may not yet be official, will be using that's I guess that's the reason why GCG issued a notice, no, getting or validating information for 2020. Now, kung yung concern is, let's say 2018 to 2020 looks good for the GOCC, and but due to the pandemic, the forecast for 2021, 2022 may not be that. I would say, what do you call this? Hindi siya ganun ka positive, no? If you look at the EO, there's a section there that allows you to implement a discounted, or I mean a lower tier when it makes sense, no. I guess the important factor that you have to consider is sustainability. So you have to look at that. So pagka na-issue yung category, most likely sabihin sa inyo category, let's say category 3 tier 2, no, category 3 tier 2. But that's the last 3 years. If your 2021 is not looking good, 2022 you think forecast is not going to be great as well, then you can implement a lower tier structure or a percentage of the category 1 if you're under category 1. Okay, for revenue, annual gross revenue less captive statutory contribution. It's defined here as your revenue less cost of goods sold. That is what's considered. For the category 1 and 2, it's your operating expense, including MOOE, personnel service cost, and depending on the category, it could be inclusive of operational subsidies. For the others, cost plus investment income.
All right. So basically, it's aligned or it's depending on the category that you're
Yes.
based on.
So depende po sa category nyo. That's why we categorize. We captured the more appropriate financial measure. No? Again, if you report your financials, ang kinukonsider nyong revenue is statutory contribution. Sample lang po to, wala akong pinupunteriya. Kung ang kinukonsider nyong financially is a contribution na captive, we try to look for a more appropriate financial that would give us an indication of the complexity. Okay, other questions?
Yeah. So what will happen to the benefits that are unique to the GOCCs, or will those be phased out under the CO?
For cash-based payments, yung kasamang allowances and so on, I believe there's a clause in the EO that mentions what to do with that, no? Apologies, I cannot recall, but if and when, kung wala man yan, I'm sure it's part of the IRR because we have discussed that with the GCG, what will happen to those. Now, for the benefits, definitely walang drawback. That walang clawback of those benefits, I'm sure. Pero I believe very clear yung EO in terms of what will happen to the PF healthcare moving forward. It will be standardized.
Okay. I think but most of the other questions are policy related, which we may not have an answer to right now and may be addressed by the IRR. But rest assured, for those who have pasted their questions, that we are collecting them, and will be providing GCG a copy of that. We're actually leading to the last question, Pat, around the framework. Will GCG include GOCCs in drafting the implementation guidelines?
Sorry, will they include?
Will GCG include the GOCCs in the drafting of the implementing guidelines?
Well, I believe GCG is now focused on drafting that implementing guidelines, no? And GOCCs have already been consulted during evaluation phase, no? So honestly, I'm not so sure, pero I think yung consultation process already happened, no, during the review process.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think at the beginning, but if I'm not mistaken, since we also talked about it in the design itself, we had consultations, like you mentioned, with the other
Yeah, yeah,
stakeholders. So in that sense, they're quite involved. Although in terms of the drafting, it would highly be lifted from the EO itself. And I think
yes.
they try to stick to the EO itself. And I'm sure in a few weeks they'll be able to provide the IRR. Let me see if we have a few more questions on that regard. When will GCG communicate the category of the GOCCs? Do we have a time?
Okay. Uh, as mentioned a while ago, they're working on the implementing rules and guidelines. No, my sense is that within those 90 days you will hear, and probably much earlier because they're already reviewing. They're finalizing the review on the leveling, and they're given a mandate to report to the office of the president within 90 days. So at least for those who were able to comply with the submission, and probably you have to respond to that notice of GCG, no? Just have to wait for the implementation guidelines and the authorization. They're already working on it.
Yep. All right. I think that's the last question that we have collected to be answered for this session. The rest
Yeah.
will be answered after the session.
Yeah. So I see questions in the chat box, no. So what we tried to do is answer questions related to the framework, or at least those items that were directly involved. For policy-related concerns, that would be addressed by GCG or the IRR. Again, as mentioned, all those questions, those who have indicated their company names and the questions, we will compile them. GCG will respond to them directly. And then watch out for GCG issuance. They have, nasa website nila, no? So you can see kung meron silang mga notices that will require certain information. Okay? So, uh, again, apologies for those na hindi na namin masasagot yung questions now. GCG will get back to you. And thank you for your time. Thanks so much for making time for this session. I hope we were able to provide clarity in terms of the framework and the methodology, as well as the rationale behind, no, yung principles behind the design of the CPCS. So, let's just wait a bit, no? DCG will be issuing an IRR together with the authorization in the coming siguro soon, no? And thank you everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.